was struck. I was struck by the kind of discussion that unfolded in the American press, perhaps highlighted by a news item in New York Times one day, which said that more and more Americans were going to bookshops to buy copies of the Quran because they expected to get from it some idea as to the motivation of those who carried out the bombings of 9/11. So much so that the sale of the Quran was making it one in the list of top bestsellers in the U.S. in that period. I then went home, and the war in Afghanistan had already begun. The war on Iraq was being talked about. The possibility of an intervention in Iraq was being talked about. The talk in the U.S. amongst top politicians was peppered with references to the Bible and biblical language. And yet, of course, I realized that there was no line in bookshops in Kampala of people wanting to buy copies of the Bible to get some idea of why there was an invasion of Afghanistan and an impending invasion of Iraq, even though people were extremely worried and concerned about this trend of developments. So I set about thinking of why this difference. Why was the public debate in the U.S. Framed in this particular way, but not the public debate in Uganda? And I thought that to get an understanding of it, I should read the sort of semi-official public intellectuals, those who frame the semi-official public debate. And I began to read it, and it didn't take much longer before I noticed that there was a debate. It wasn't simply a chorus. There was a debate, and the reference points in the debate were marked by two leading public intellectuals, Samuel Huntington and Bernard Lewis. And the difference between them seemed to be that Huntington, with his book on Clash of Civilizations, had a very sort of straight and clear point of view, which was that the Cold War was an internal affair, it was an in-house affair, it was a civil war inside the West, that you ain't seen nothing yet, and that we're now finally getting to a global war, and that global war is going to be between civilizations, and in this the heartland the heartland of the threat is Islam. And from the Huntingtonian point of view, basically all Muslims were bad, unless proven to be good. Bernard Lewis had a slightly different idea. Lewis's idea, or at least Lewis's argument, as I gathered it, was basically there would be a mistake to think of all Muslims as bad Muslims. All Muslims as bad. That in fact it was crucial for the U.S. to distinguish between good and bad Muslims. And that in short, basically, good Muslims were modernized Muslims. Muslims who were able to treat their religion as something belonging to the private sphere. And bad Muslims were pre-modern Muslims who brought their religion into the public sphere. And that the objective of American foreign policy should be to identify good Muslims, to organize them, to resource them, and get them to confront bad Muslims. In other words, the way forward would be not a direct intervention by the U.S., but a civil war inside Islam. A civil war in which American resourced good Muslims would confront, quarantine and contain, not eliminate, the bad ones. And next I began to realize that even though this was a debate, as in every debate, there are certain shared assumptions. And the first shared assumption seemed to me was about culture and politics. It was about that if you want to understand the politics of the Muslims, particularly the bad Muslims, then you have to understand their culture. Why the rush to the bookshops to buy copies of the Quran in order to get an understanding of motivations? That with good Muslims it may be slightly different, but with bad ones, the key, the entry point has to be culture. And it reminded me of things I had read ever since I began to work on my PhD, because my work until 9/11 was much more on colonialism and post-colonialism, and with specific reference to Africa. I thought the post-9/11 talk, in a way, resonated with what I had been reading in colonial archives, which was driven by an assumption that the world is divided into two, modern and pre-modern. And the difference between, the key difference between the modern and the pre-modern world, I hope you can hear me, can you? Okay. The key difference between the modern and the pre-modern world is that moderns make their culture. Moderns have a historical capacity to distinguish between the good and the bad in their culture, to do away with the bad and to build on the good. And the story of this building on the good, the story of progress, is indeed the heart and the stuff of what used to happen. History. And that modern peoples are historical peoples in that sense. But not really the pre-modern, because the pre-modern, the assumption, and this was really an assumption very much with Africa at that period. Now it's more bears on Muslims and at its core on the Middle East. But at that time it was written into, you could read it sort of most obviously in the literature on Africa, where the assumption was that the pre-modern people are born into a culture. They're born into a culture, and really they are victims of the culture they are born into. They kind of suffer from their culture, like a twitch. They can't help it. This is what the culture makes of them, and the only way to salvage them is from the outside. Is through external intervention, either an intervention which is philanthropic, or an intervention which is military. A military intervention because you may need to salvage, to save, to rescue the good ones from the bad ones. And this is what the first assumption seems to be. The first core assumption in this debate was that there is this distinction between modern and pre-modern.